Okay, this is part 2 of creating a modular input system for your Unity game. In part 1, we defined all of our actions that are going to be used in the game. We created an interface for the Input Manager class. We created the base Input Manager class, but this is just an abstract class. So now we're going to create the actual Input Manager for Unity system. And then we're going to have a functional input system. So let's go ahead and create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this one UnityInputManager. Okay, so we got the UnityInputManager class. Let's delete, start, and update. We're not going to use those. And UnityInputManager is not going to implement mono behavior, but it's going to implement Input Manager. Without two I's, just one. And you're going to see we get the error that it doesn't implement the inherited abstract member, get button up, get button down. So we're going to say show potential fixes, and we're going to say preview changes, and click apply. So now we have those 4 abstract functions that we had defined that are in the base Input Manager class. And they have the not implemented exception, so we're going to come back to those. And as always, access is at the top for alphabetical order, so I'm going to put it below just because that's the order that they're defined here in the interface. But let's get going with this Unity Input Manager class. The first thing we're going to need is a private string, and this is going to be the player access prefix. Now you may or may not use this, so by default it's going to be just set to an empty string. And we're also going to want a private integer, the maximum number of players. And considering this is not a multiplayer game, we're going to set it to 1, but we're set up for multiplayer games just in case our game later we decide to include multiplayer, or like I said, some single-player games that are more complicated may use different player numbers as well. So on these 2 fields, let's go ahead and serialize those fields. And now we're going to need some more strings, one for each action. So we're going to say private string, and I'm going to say underscore jump axis. And I'm not sure what that's set to yet. We're going to check in a second. Now the jump axis, because this is the Unity Input Manager, I need to know what axis the jump button is going to be mapped to. So if I go to the Unity and I go to the project settings input, I could see all the axes. Now there's 19 set up. Well, there's 18 set up by default, and here they are. So you can see there is a default jump axis, and the name is jump. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that, of course, for the jump axis. And now I'm going to need a string for all actions going down the list here. The next one is attack. So private string underscore attack axis. And I'm not sure what that's set to yet. What I'm going to do here is go ahead and put in all of the actions. Alright, so I've made a private string for each action that's in my action list. And then I'm going to need to type in the string of the corresponding axis I want that to match up with. So for the attack axis, jump, I had an axis called jump, but you can see here there's no axis that's predefined in Unity called jump. So, or attack. So I'm going to use fire 1. So here for the attack axis, I'm going to say fire 1. And then sub attack we'll use fire 2 because I know there's no sub attack set up. Now dash, let's go ahead and use fire 3. Now we get to run And there's no more fire or jump. There's nothing that really matches that. So what you can do is you can make your own axes. I'm going to say 19, and that's going to duplicate the last one. So I'm just going to rename this from cancel to run. And then there's a positive button here, so I guess I'll push R for run. And now I've set up my own access with the positive button. So now I could use my run axis. And then the move horizontal, that's just going to be horizontal and vertical. So there's a capital H. So horizontal and vertical. And then for pause, I think I'll use cancel. So that cancel button, which is mapped to escape, that can pause the game. Alright, so I have, you notice that this UnityInputManager class is specifically dealing with the UnityInputManager system and things that are specific to the UnityInputManager system. If I was to switch to REWIRED or a different input system, this whole entire class would be written with different functions to hook into REWIRED system. But these are all hooking into Unity's input system. So we have a private string for each axis. So now each one of our actions is mapped to a corresponding Unity axis. Now I want to serialize these fields. So let's put a serialized field here. And just to make the inspector look nice, we could put a header in here with a string of something like Unity axis mappings. Alright, and then the last variable we're going to define is an array, and it's going to be an array of dictionaries. And the dictionaries are going to have a key, which is an integer, and then the value is going to be a string. So I'm going to put this in and make it an array, and I'm going to call that underscore actions. Alright, so let's get on to the awake function. So not public, but we're going to do a protected override void awake. And that's going to call the base awake. That's fine. And then we're going to say if input manager dot instance is not equal to null. So there is already an existing input manager. Then we're going to say is enabled is equal to false. And then we're just going to return and be done. And the reason why is by default our game is going to be using the UnityInputManager class. But later if we decide to add a new input system like REWIRED, and then we add a REWIRED input manager, then the input manager instance will not be equal to null. So the Unity one is just going to turn itself off. So this just says if there's already an input manager, go ahead and turn the default Unity one off and use whichever one is already in the instance. The next thing we're going to do here is set instance, and we're going to say this. So set instance is a function we already wrote right here, and we're going to set the instance to this input manager. And now we need to set up the actions, the action dictionary for each player. So we're going to say underscore actions. This is our array of dictionaries is equal to new dictionary integer string. And the length of the array is going to be one dictionary for every player. So we're going to say the length of the array is equal to the max number of players. Now right now that's set to 1, but if this was a 4-player game, there would be 4 dictionaries in the array, 1 for each player. The next thing we're going to do is go through each player and populate the dictionary with corresponding actions. So we're going to say for integer I is equal to 0, and we're going to say I is less than the max number of players. So for each player, we're going to loop through this I++. The first thing we're going to do is create a new dictionary entry. We've defined an array of dictionaries, but we haven't populated it with any dictionaries at all. So we're going to make a new dictionary, and that's going to be, of course, an integer string dictionary. And we're going to call that player actions. So this current player actions, remember, we need to assume that there's perhaps 4 players. So we're going to say the player actions is equal to a new dictionary of integer strings. So we have an array of dictionaries, but we haven't made any dictionaries yet. Now we've actually made one. It's called player actions. And then we're going to say underscore actions I. So we're going to put this dictionary into its spot in the array. And we're going to say that's equal to player actions. So now we've moved a dictionary into the array. Okay, now let's make a quick string prefix. This is just a prefix. The one that we've set up here, player access prefix. And right now it's an empty string. So we're going to check if the string is empty. We're going to say if not string is null or empty. And we want to check the player access prefix string. And what I'm going to do is put a question mark. This is just a Boolean check. It's saying true or false. What I type next is the true condition. So if the player access prefix string, which is right now it's empty. So if it's not null or empty, then what we're going to do is we're going to say the player access prefix plus I. So string prefix is equal to player access prefix plus I if it has some value in here. If it doesn't have a value, we're just going to do string.empty. So now we have a string prefix, and if there's some value in here, it's going to be that value plus I, the player's number. And if there's no value in there like there is right now, it's just going to be an empty string. So we have a prefix, and now we need to add some actions into the dictionary. Currently, there is no function for add actions, so we're going to create a function. And of course, it's going to be called add action. Very simple function down here. It's going to be a private static void add action. It's going to take a few parameters. It needs an input action. So that's, of course, one of these. And then it needs a string action name. So it's going to need an action name passed into it. And it also needs to know what dictionary to put the action into. So we're going to have to pass in a dictionary of integer strings. And we'll call that variable actions. And then we're just going to do one thing really quick. We're going to check if the string is null or empty. The action name string, this one right here. If this is null or empty, we just want to return and stop right there. So if there is an action name, then we are going to go ahead and do actions. This is the name of the dictionary that we've passed in. So we're going to say the dictionary.add, and the key for our dictionary is an integer. So I'm going to say let's get the integer value of our input action. So the input action here, those all have an integer value. We could see that right next to it. So get that integer value and put that as the key into the dictionary. And then for the string value, we're going to use the action name. That's the one we've passed here. So that is the add action function. So now we can say add action, and we're going to need an input action. So we'll start with jump. That's what we've been starting with. And then we're going to say prefix, the string prefix, plus underscore jump access. And then the dictionary, of course, is this player actions dictionary. So player actions. And then we're going to need to add one action. So we want to put all of these actions into the dictionary. So we're going to need to copy and paste this line a number of times. And then for each one of these, we're going to say input.attack, .subattack, okay, so we've set the input action to each action, and then I just need to bring the prefix, the correct prefix down here. Okay, so now we have a dictionary and we've added all of the actions into the dictionary. Now we're just going to have to handle what happens when a button is pressed. So we're not going to throw a new not implemented yet exception. We actually need to do something here. And this is, of course, a function that returns a Boolean. So we're going to say bool value, and that's going to be equal to input.getButton. And so you can see here we're calling the actual Unity's input system, and we're calling their getButton function. So input.getButton, we're going to do underscore actions. It's in some brackets here. And we're going to do player ID. And then we're going to do another bracket set. And we're going to put in some parentheses to get the value of an integer of action. And then we're going to return that value. Okay, now this is really confusing, so I'm going to do my best to explain it really quick. When you call Unity's input system input.getButton, that wants a string, and normally you would pass in fire1. So this is actually, of course, a string value, but it's kind of hard to see where it's getting the string from. So I'm going to start at the end and go to the beginning. First of all, integer action, that is a entry into our dictionary, and we have a dictionary which takes a key value, and we've defined our dictionary that it's an integer key and a string value. So that means that in our dictionaries it's going to be something like a number and then a word like fire1. And I think 2 is actually the correct. Okay, so this is our dictionary. The problem is that we have an array of dictionaries. So we have a bunch of dictionaries. So here's an array, and this array is holding a bunch of these in it, and those are going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, for example. And then so each one of these is going to contain one of these dictionaries. So we're saying input.getButton underscore actions. That is the array. So first we're going to need to say which number in the array do you want? And in this case, it's the player's ID. So assuming the player is player 1, that would probably be 0. So that's going to go out, and that's going to get the first array entry in this array. Now so that's going to get 0. Now 0 is a dictionary of key values, which happen to be integers and strings. So to get to one of those, I need to pass in its key. So just like the array, we need to reference which one we want by putting it in brackets and then putting a number in. Do you want the 0, 1, 2, 3? Which one which one do you want? Now 0, of course, is going to be this one. So we have underscore actions, that's the array. We have player ID. This is the which array entry do you want? Now that we have a dictionary, because this part represents the which dictionary do you want? Now that we've identified which dictionary do we want, what entry do you want inside of that dictionary? And that is underscore input action. Underscore input action, remember, of course, it has an integer attached with it. So in this case, if we were to pass in the action of shoot, or what was it called up here, attack. So if we're going to pass in attack, then it's going to say, okay, what's attack's integer value? And it's going to go get that right here. That's a 2. So this gets populated with a 2. And then let's say we were getting player ID 0. So this says go to the actions array, get player 0, and then go to entry number 2 and get that string, because we have an integer string. So it goes to number 2 and it gets the string that we've put into it. The string we've put into it is defined right here. So when it goes to that dictionary, the correct player and the correct dictionary, and it goes and it calls this, what is returned is fire 1. Alright, so I'm going to control Z all that. I hope I explained that good enough. It's pretty confusing the way it's written out right here. And we're going to do the same thing for get button down. We're just going to have to change this to get button down. And then we want to do the same thing for get button up. And then we want to do the same thing for the get access. But on the get access, it's a float. It returns a float. So we're going to have to say float value is equal to input.get access raw. And then in here, we're going to just pass in the same exact value. Go get that. Whatever player it is, find their dictionary and get whichever action we're looking for. And then we're going to have to return the value. Okay, now that we have that set up, we should actually have a completely functional input system created in Unity where we have our own defined inputs. And we can call those at any time. And currently, we've hooked it into the Unity Input Manager. But later, we could hook it into any other input system and it would work. So let's go ahead and create an object that's going to use input from this. I'm just going to use a cube. And I'm going to make a new script on this called move up. And move up is just going to take some input and it's going to move the cube up. So at any time, I could call input manager .instance .get button down, get button up, get access. So I could say get button, and this needs a player ID, so I'm going to say 0, and it needs an input action, so I'm going to say input action .jump, or let's do attack. Alright, so this is using our input manager to call the attack function, and then this would be the same exact call since we're using the Unity Input Manager. We would call input with a capital I. That gives us Unity's Input Manager, and we would say get button fire 1. So both of these lines of code are going to respond to the getting the fire 1 input. This is the way that we do it with our custom input system, and this would have been the old way of doing it. The problem is if we program our whole game with code like this and then we change our input system, we're going to have to go, or we decide to make it multiplayer, we're going to have to go through and change every single place we type this code. So with our system, we're already set up for that, and it will work with multiplayer or if we change to a different input system. So there's going to be an easier way of calling this if you have a script that uses a lot of input. Let's go ahead and cache this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a private input manager, the interface for the input manager. And I'm just going to call that input. And then in start, we're going to say input is equal to that input manager dot instance. So now at any time in my code, I just have to call input dot get button. So because I've cached my input manager, and now we've cached it here on start, now I could just, with a lowercase I, say input dot, and then I have access to all of my functions. Get button down, get access. Get access is going to want a player ID and an input action dot, and we're going to pass in the move horizontal axis. And that's the way we do it now. And again, the old way to do that would have been input.getAccess or getAccess raw, and then you would pass in horizontal. But our Unity Input Manager class is making that connection right down here with the getAccess raw. Okay, so we have the Unity Input Manager class completed. We have a cube in here. We know how to get input now, so I'm just going to say if input with the lowercase I, that's my system, dot get button down. So when they press the button down, and it's going to be for player 0, and then it's going to be input action, let's do attack. So if the player presses down the attack button, let's just do transform position plus equals new vector. Well, let's just do vector 3 dot up. That should be a vector 3 in the up direction of 1 unit. All right, so if the player presses the attack button, move the cube up. Let's see if it works. And it doesn't. We've got errors right here. I've never even included my input manager anywhere in the scene, so it's never getting created. So let me create a new game object. I'll call this input manager, and then we'll add a component here. On this one, we only add the Unity Input Manager because the Input Manager interface and the Input Manager base class, neither one of these are complete classes, so neither one of those could be added. The only complete class that we have here is the Unity Input Manager, so that's the only one that I can add, of course, to a game object. So now that I've added that, the maximum number of players is 1. I don't want a player access prefix. I can set up my jump accesses here, so I could come in here and edit these if they didn't match up to the Unity input system, but I know they do because we did that as we were writing the script. But I could change them easily right here if I want to. So now that I have the input manager in the scene, I'm not going to get this null reference exception. And if I press spacebar, input 1, not spacebar, to click the mouse, it moves the cube up, and that is definitely using our new input system. So now that we have our own custom input system created, we're using our own custom input system in all of our scripts. So at any time, if I decide, if there's a change with the way that we're doing Unity input, I don't have to go through all my scripts and change every single place that it says input.get button. I just have to come here to the input manager script and make some changes here. And then the next part of this tutorial series, we're going to look at using a custom input system, not the Unity Input Manager. So we're going to get rewired, and we're going to use that with our game, with our base Input Manager class, and we're going to make a rewired Input Manager so that we have switched our input systems and we're still using our own Input Manager system. All right, so if this helps, give it a like, subscribe. I'll see you guys in part 3.